You learn to read the room before you could read yourself. You sit in the corner of a crowded space, a classroom, a family dinner, a party you didn't want to attend, and you're doing that thing again. That quiet calculation, scanning faces, measuring tone, predicting who might need something, who might turn volatile, who might notice you if you move wrong. You're not antisocial, you're not shy in the way people think. You're just watching, always watching. Because somewhere deep in the architecture of your nervous system, you learn that silence is safety, that invisibility is survival, that the less space you take up, the less you'll be hurt. And here's the thing nobody tells you about being the quiet kid. It's not a personality trait. It's a defense mechanism that became an identity. You didn't choose to become this way. You adapted. Maybe your household was loud in all the wrong ways, volatile, unpredictable, a place where emotional storms arrived without warning. Maybe you had siblings who demanded all the oxygen in the room and you learned that your needs were secondary, that peace was maintained by your silence. Maybe you were sensitive in a world that punished sensitivity, so you built walls so high that even you forgot what you were protecting. But here's the paradox, the cruel joke your nervous system played on you, the thing that saved you, is now the thing sabotaging you. That hypervigilance that kept you safe as a child, it's now the reason you can't relax at a dinner party without mentally cataloging everyone's emotional state. That ability to make yourself small, it's why you struggle to advocate for yourself at work, why you apologize for taking up space, why you feel guilty for having needs. That instinct to observe rather than participate. It's become the reason you feel like a ghost in your own life, present but not really there, watching everyone else live while you remain on the periphery, convinced that this is just who you are. But it's not who you are, it's who you had to become. Let's talk about what actually happened to you neurologically when you became the quiet kid. There's a concept in developmental psychology called hypervigilance, a state of elevated sensory sensitivity combined with an exaggerated intensity of behaviors designed to detect threat. When you grow up in an environment where emotional safety is inconsistent, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, goes into overdrive. It becomes a smoke detector that can't differentiate between burnt toast and a house fire. Every raised voice, every shift in facial expression, every silence that lasts too long becomes a potential danger signal. Think of your childhood nervous system like a radio constantly scanning for signals. Most kids can tune into a single station, play, curiosity, exploration, but you were monitoring every frequency simultaneously. The static never stopped. This isn't metaphorical. This is your autonomic nervous system stuck in a state called dorsal vagal shutdown, a biological response where when fight or flight isn't possible, the body chooses a third option: freeze, disappear. Become so still, so quiet, so undemanding that the threat passes over you. This is how you survived, but survival mode isn't meant to be a permanent residence. Here's what else happened. Your default mode network, the parts of your brain responsible for self-referential thinking and introspection, began to wire itself around threat prediction rather than self-discovery. Instead of developing a strong sense of who am I, you developed an acute sense of who do I need to be to stay safe. Your identity became fluid, adaptive, performative. You became a master at reading others because you never had the safety to explore yourself. Psychologists call this self-abandonment. Philosopher Martin Buber might call it living in I-it relationships, where you relate to yourself as an object to be managed rather than a subject to be known. There's also a term for what many quiet kids experience: emotional parentification. This is when a child takes on the role of managing the emotional climate of their family system. You weren't just quiet, you were the thermostat. You absorbed tension, preempted conflict, made yourself invisible when things were unstable and hypervisible when someone needed comfort. You became fluent in everyone's emotional language except your own. And here's the neurological cost. When a developing brain spends its formative years in survival mode, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, emotional regulation, and sense of self, doesn't get the bandwidth it needs. You were too busy managing everyone else's nervous system to develop your own. The result, an adult who is profoundly attuned to others and profoundly disconnected from themselves. Let me tell you what nobody says about being the quiet kid. It's not peaceful, it's exhausting. There's an invisible grief you carry, the grief of a childhood spent observing rather than experiencing, of a self that was never allowed to fully emerge. You watch other people move through the world with this casual confidence, this ease of being, and you wonder what that's like. To speak without calculating, to take up space without apologizing, to exist without constantly monitoring the emotional weather around you. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you can't become who you are when you've spent your entire life becoming who you need to be for others. The core fear driving all of this: vulnerability, not vulnerability in the abstract, but the specific terror that if people see the real you, messy, needy, imperfect, they'll reject you, or worse, they'll weaponize it. So you show them the quiet version, the palatable version, the version that doesn't ask for too much or reveal too much or feel too much. But here's what you sacrificed for that: safety, authenticity. And authenticity isn't some abstract psychological concept. It's the felt sense of being real in your own body, in your own life. It's the difference between existing and living. You learn to treat your own needs like an inconvenience, your own emotions like a burden, your own desires like something shameful. You became fluent in the language of suppression. I'm fine. It's not a big deal. I don't want to bother anyone. These phrases aren't politeness. They're the mantras of a child who learned that their internal world was too much, too complicated, too demanding for the people around them. And so you made yourself less. You compressed your bigness into something manageable, something quiet, something that wouldn't disrupt the fragile peace you were desperately trying to maintain. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard called this the sickness unto death, the despair of not being willing to be oneself. He understood that the most profound suffering isn't physical pain, but the spiritual violence of living inauthentically, of wearing a mask so long you forget there's a face underneath. This is the quiet kid's burden. You are homesick for a self you've never met. Now let's talk about how this shows up when you're 30, 40, 50 years old, still carrying the coping strategies of a child who just wanted to be safe. You might find yourself unable to enjoy success. When something good happens, your first instinct isn't joy, it's suspicion, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You've been in survival mode so long that peace feels dangerous, like the calm before the storm. You self-sabotage not because you're broken, but because chaos is familiar and stability is terrifying. You become an adult who apologizes for existing. You say sorry when someone bumps into you. You minimize your needs in relationships, always positioning yourself as low maintenance, never wanting to be too much. You've internalized the belief that your presence is an imposition, that love is something you have to earn through usefulness rather than something you deserve simply by being. You struggle with decision-making, especially about yourself. When someone asks what you want, what restaurant, what movie, what you need, you freeze. Not because you don't have preferences, but because you've spent so long orienting around everyone else's needs that your own desires feel foreign, even selfish. You've become a master at reading the room, but illiterate in reading yourself. You have an uncanny ability to detect emotional shifts in others, but you're blindsided by your own feelings. You can sense when someone is upset from 3 rooms away, but you'll ignore your own exhaustion, your own anger, your own sadness until your body forces you to pay attention through illness or breakdown. You've trained yourself to be hyper-aware of external emotional data while remaining disconnected from your internal landscape. You choose relationships where you can remain the observer. You're drawn to loud people, dramatic people, people who need you, because in those dynamics you don't have to risk being seen. You can stay in your familiar role, the listener, the supporter, the person who doesn't ask for much. But you end up feeling lonely in every relationship because nobody knows the real you. How could they? You've never let them close enough to see. You experience profound guilt around rest, pleasure, and self-care. Taking a day off feels irresponsible. Spending money on yourself feels indulgent. Setting a boundary feels cruel. Because somewhere in your nervous system, you still believe that your worth is conditional, that if you're not useful, if you're not accommodating, if you're not quiet and easy, you'll be abandoned. You've built a life that looks good on paper but feels empty, because you've made every decision based on what's safe, what's expected, what will minimize conflict. You've optimized for external approval rather than internal alignment. And now you're an adult with a resume that impresses people and an inner life that exhausts you. These aren't personality flaws. These are coping strategies that worked once but are now outdated. You're running software designed for a threat that no longer exists. The unlearning begins with this recognition: you are not broken. You are adapted to brokenness. The first step isn't fixing yourself, it's witnessing yourself, recognizing that the quiet kid inside you wasn't weak or antisocial or fundamentally flawed. They were brilliant. They found a way to survive an environment that didn't make sense. But survival strategies and living strategies are different things. So how do you heal from being the quiet kid? How do you unlearn silence as safety? You start by doing the thing that terrifies you most. You let yourself be seen. Not all at once, not perfectly, but incrementally. You practice saying "I need" instead of "I'm fine." You practice taking up space even when your nervous system screams at you to shrink. You practice expressing a preference, voicing a boundary, admitting when something hurts. You practice being a person instead of a ghost. There's a therapeutic concept called inner child reparenting. It's not about fixing your parents or rewriting your childhood. It's about becoming the presence for yourself that you needed then. When that hypervigilant part of you kicks in at a party, scanning for threat, you pause and whisper to that frightened kid inside, "We're safe now. You can rest. I've got us." You do what psychologists call shadow work, the practice of turning toward the parts of yourself you've exiled. Your anger, your needs, your bigness. The parts you were told were too much. You bring them back into the light, not to indulge them recklessly, but to integrate them into your wholeness. You learn that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the birthplace of connection. Every time you risk being real with someone, even if your voice shakes, even if you want to disappear, you're rewiring your nervous system. You're teaching it that authenticity doesn't equal annihilation. You practice what trauma therapist Gabor Mate calls compassionate inquiry, turning toward your patterns with curiosity instead of judgment. When you notice yourself shrinking, you ask, "What am I afraid will happen if I take up space?" When you notice yourself over-accommodating, you ask, "What am I trying to prevent?" And slowly, painfully, beautifully, you remember something revolutionary. Your needs are not a burden. Your voice is not a threat. Your presence is not an imposition. The psychologist Donald Winnicott wrote, "It is a joy to be hidden and disaster not to be found. You've spent your life hidden. Now comes the work of letting yourself be found." This isn't about becoming loud or extroverted or suddenly confident. This is about authenticity, not performance. Some quiet kids heal and remain quiet, but it's a chosen quietness now, not a survival mechanism. A quietness that comes from peace rather than fear. A stillness that's restful rather than frozen. The goal isn't to fix yourself. The goal is to become whole, to integrate all the parts you've kept in exile, to expand into the fullness of who you are rather than the smallness of who you had to be. You were never the problem. You were the solution to a problem you didn't create. And now you get to choose a different strategy, one that doesn't require you to disappear. If this resonated with you, if you felt seen in these words, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this journey of understanding ourselves better. Because healing isn't a solo endeavor, it happens in community, in recognition, in the radical act of letting ourselves be known. You don't have to be quiet anymore, the threat has passed. You're allowed to have a voice now.